Welcome, everyone. We're just going to give it a few moments for folks to arrive before we begin. We'll be starting shortly, just shortly after 12 p.m. We just want to allow everyone to get into the Zoom meeting. Just a note as well, you can turn on the captions functions if you press the More button, and then there's a caption button if that's helpful to you. So I'll just give it another minute, and then we'll get started. All right, so welcome everyone to today's patient group focused webinar on update for patient organizations, drug reimbursement review input process. This webinar is in follow-up to our May 8th webinar, launching this new project and extensive engagement with patient groups. My name's Sam Sutherland. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm an engagement officer here at Canada's Drug Agency. I'll be helping to host today. Bienvenue à tous à notre webinaire titulé Mise à jour pour les organisations de patients et patientes. Je m'appelle Sam Sutherland, mes pronoms sont il, lui, et je suis un agent d'engagement. Le webinaire aujourd'hui sera en anglais, mais je vous souhaite un gros bonjour à tous nos participants francophones. I'm speaking to you today from Ottawa, located on the traditional, unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. The Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation have been the keepers and stewards of this land for thousands of years, over many generations. I'd like to encourage you all to think about where you live, work, and play. Take a moment to acknowledge the peoples who traditionally occupied, who sustained, and who continue to care for the land that you call home. As we give it a moment for folks to arrive, I'll just go over a few housekeeping items. Today's presentation is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel early next week. We will be sending a link to the recording to everyone who registered for the webinar. We should have time for several questions from the audience, and so at any point you can submit questions by clicking on the little box in the ribbon with the Q&A in it. As I mentioned, my name's Sam. I'll be your host for the session. I am joined today by Michelle Gibbons, our Director of Engagement, and Deirdre Dijon, our Lead of Health Technology Assessment and Deliberation. So on the agenda for today, we are going to set the stage. So Deirdre is going to provide a short overview of our patient group input in the context of drug reimbursement reviews to do a little bit of level setting with everyone. Followed by Michelle, who will highlight the objectives of this work and provide an overview of what we did as part of this project. We'll share some key insights and themes about what we heard from patient groups from our engagement period. We'll highlight next steps, what actions we're taking as a result of our engagement efforts as well. We'll spotlight a few key details for you to know coming out of the webinar today, and we'll have some time for question and answers. And finally, we'll wrap up the session. So maybe I can start by passing it over to Deirdre. She'll help us set the stage for the webinar today and provide some context for patient group input into reimbursement reviews and the deliberative framework used by expert committees. Over to you, Deirdre.
Thanks, Sam. Before we dive in, we want to spend a few minutes to level set by reviewing the role of patient group input in reimbursement reviews and how it's considered in deliberations at CDA AMC. So I'll start with a quick overview of how patient group input fits into our HTA process. At the top of the slide, you'll see 3 stages of the process: input, throughput, and output. These show how information flows through a reimbursement review. During the input stage, our teams produce review reports that communicate the assessment of the evidence. For every review, we also put out a call for input from interested parties. Patient groups, clinician groups, and public drug programs are invited to participate, and we work closely with clinical specialists for each review. Patient group input at this stage is essential because it helps to inform several parts of the review, including the clinical and economic assessments, ethical considerations, and testing procedure considerations. It ensures that the reviews reflect the experiences of people living with the condition. In the throughput stage, the expert committees meet to deliberate, drawing from the review reports and all of the input from interested parties and clinical specialists. The patient member of the committee highlights key insights from patient groups, and the committee uses the deliberative framework to guide their discussion. This is where patient perspectives help the committee to understand what matters most to patients and what needs are still unmet. And finally, in the output stage, the committee makes a reimbursement recommendation based on our recommendation framework, which would be to reimburse, reimburse with conditions, or not to reimburse. This recommendation, along with the rationale behind it, is communicated in the recommendation report. In February 2025, we published an expert committee deliberation at CDA AMC guide on our website. It provides more detail on that HTA process, how our expert committees deliberate, and how they apply the new deliberative framework. This framework is built around 5 domains of value that help the committee to consider the value of a technology from multiple angles. The clinical value domain considers the drug's benefits and harms compared with existing options and how those influence patients' health and health-related quality of life. Unmet clinical needs speaks to the morbidity or the mortality arising from a condition that is not addressed effectively by available treatments. Here, the committees also consider whether there are challenges in collecting robust clinical evidence due to the rarity of the condition or other ethical issues such as conducting research with vulnerable populations. The distinct social and ethical considerations domain addresses the social and ethical implications of health technologies that weren't already addressed in the other domains, and how they affect patients, caregivers, populations, and the organization of health systems. It includes non-clinical needs, which are the factors that influence the appropriateness, the acceptability, and the accessibility of a health technology beyond its direct clinical outcomes. These factors often relate to the impact of how the treatments are delivered. So, for example, if a treatment currently requires IV infusions at a hospital or clinic, offering an oral option could reduce the need for travel. So, even if the clinical benefits of the 2 treatments were the same, the mode of administration could reduce treatment burden, and that may be valuable to patients and caregivers. Finally, this domain considers broader social and ethical considerations related to how a technology is designed, evaluated, and put into practice. The economic considerations domains looks at the economic evidence to inform the financial, human, or other resource implications associated with the technology under review, given its clinical benefits. And finally, impacts on health systems assesses the feasibility of bringing the technology into the health system, both organizationally and economically. So this slide mainly was about the structure of the framework, and the next slide will focus on how patient perspectives are pulled into this structure during a deliberation. What's most important to know is that patients' and caregivers' perspectives are integrated throughout every domain of this framework. With clinical value, the committee looks at the benefits and harms of the drug compared to what's already available. They also consider which outcomes matter most to patients, how a drug might affect daily life, and whether it helps to address the unmet clinical needs that patients have identified. For unmet clinical need, patients' perspectives help the committee to understand where current treatments fall short, either treatments that aren't available or effective or that result in challenging side effects, or maybe where there's a lack of options for certain groups of people. Distinct social and ethical considerations is where the committees examine issues that go beyond the clinical effects. They consider whether a technology aligns with patients' and caregivers' values and whether it addresses non-clinical needs or the practical realities of living with a condition. They also look at the broader ethical considerations for patients and caregivers, such as autonomy and privacy. With economic considerations, patient perspectives help to contextualize the economic evidence from the societal perspective by describing the types of financial income impacts patients and caregivers experience when managing or treating the condition. And finally, for impacts on health systems, the committees consider whether the health system can support the use of the technology. If a new biomarker test is needed, experiences with accessing that testing can inform its assessment. So I'll now pass it over to Michelle to provide an overview of this project and the work we've done to date.
Thank you, Deirdre. I just want to take a moment to highlight our commitment to evolve patient group input process by connecting this work to the priorities and guiding principles that are articulated in our strategic plan. As Deirdre just explained, the patient group input process is a key contribution to our pharmaceutical reimbursement reviews program, which is one of the important ways that we deliver on our purpose to power evidence-informed, evidence-driven drug, health technology, and system decisions. Our strategic plan sets a direction for 2025 to 2030 that's built around three priorities: anticipate, innovate, and transform. For us, these aren't just abstract goals, they're a framework for how we work every day. Initiating work to inform how we improve the patient group input process is just one example of where we are exploring and taking action to innovate how we do our work. We also have the guiding principles of excellence, agility, integrity, partnership, and inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility that guide our work each and every day. These principles shape how we engage, how we listen, and how we lead. Our guiding principles of partnership and idea are particularly relevant for how we've been working to advance how we evolve the patient group input process. And I look forward to sharing more with you about that. I want to emphasize one other point before I shift to provide an overview of this initiative for how we're evolving, working to evolve patient group input. As Deirdre has already highlighted with her description of how patient perspectives are incorporated into reimbursement reviews, patient perspectives provided through the patient group input process are essential to the pharmaceutical reimbursement review process. And we are committed to ensuring meaningful involvement of patients in drug reimbursement reviews so that patient perspectives are included in the expert committee's deliberation, as Deirdre described, and reflected in the review and recommendation reports. We recognize the importance of contextualizing the available evidence with patient and caregiver perspectives informed by their lived and living experience. And this is, a key commitments and context for how we're working to evolve the patient group input process. Now, shifting to our current initiative. Over time, patient groups contributing input to reimbursement reviews have been sharing their experience and perspectives on that process and their experience with us. So when we committed to a focused initiative to consider opportunities to evolve how we engage patient groups in drug reimbursement reviews, we started by reviewing what we had already heard from the patient community. By looking at the common points often raised, we proposed the following improvement objectives as a starting point, and we've outlined them on the slide there for you. First of all, to improve the ease of patient input submissions, including clarifying processes and requirements and reducing the effort and resources required by patient groups, increasing clarity on how patient group input is used during evidence assessments and expert committee deliberations, and aligning and focusing on what input is needed from the patient perspective to support evidence assessments and deliberations. We then validated these improvement objectives through the engagement activities that I will give an overview of next. In preparation for the engagement activities that we wanted to undertake, we did some background work. As I noted, this background work included reviewing feedback that we had already heard about the process. We also discussed needs and opportunities for evolving patient group input with internal staff and expert committee members. We consulted with other health technology assessment agencies on their practices. And through these steps, we identified what we felt we needed to hear and learn about from patients as we initiated efforts to engage on how to evolve the patient group input process. Then in May and June this year, we offered multiple ways for patients and patient groups to engage with us and share their thoughts and experiences. We wanted to ensure that interested patients and patient groups had an opportunity to choose a way to participate and contribute that they preferred or worked best for them. So through these multiple methods of engagement, we in the end engaged with 96 interested parties as part of this process. The majority were patient groups, but we also heard from patients, caregivers as individuals, and engaged with our patient and community advisory committee as well. For the engagement activities, we asked about key areas to help inform us about the preferences and needs for how we evolve the patient group input process. We asked about new ways for submitting patient input, ideas for how to focus input on what is needed, suggestions for guidance needed to help groups with their input submission, and also communication needs related to the input process. We are very grateful for the number of groups and individuals who took the time to share a wealth of helpful feedback and ideas with us. I want to reiterate our sincerest thanks to all who participated and contributed. It has been, truly invaluable to us. In a moment, Sam is going to share more about what we heard through the engagement process. After that, I will return to talk about where we landed with our immediate next steps. And you'll see from what Sam will present next that we have a lot of opportunities and ideas to consider. I will share a little later that we plan to move forward with some improvements in the shorter term, but also want to note that we intend to continue to review ways we can improve the input process over time, and that we will continue to return to what we heard through this engagement process from these consultations to inform subsequent changes to our next steps. I'll now pass it over to Sam to highlight what we heard during this engagement period. Sam, over to you.
Thanks, Michelle. So let's dive a little bit deeper into what we heard during our consultation process. So we'll highlight a few, key pieces that we heard and some ideas that were shared with us. So as we mentioned earlier, we heard from just under 100 various groups of patient groups, patients, and caregivers during the course of our engagement. So we've been really busy at work, working through a lot of the comments that we heard throughout the consultation process, to figure out what was important to patient groups and what would be feasible for us to undertake now. So some of the key aspects that came forward during the consultation include simplicity, clarity, and flexibility, the drug system as a whole, equity and inclusion, the deliberative framework alignment, and collection methods and submission formats and templates. So maybe starting with simplicity, we heard that processes and templates should be easy to understand and use, reducing confusion and unnecessary efforts. Oh, next slide, please. We heard that further clarity on language and concepts in the deliberative framework are needed as well. In terms of clarity, clear guidance on what's needed, how input informs deliberations, and expectations for submissions were highlighted. Groups want to collect what is needed to help support deliberations and want more direct guidance on this to avoid inefficient over-collecting of patient insights. We also heard that groups want to know what their input informed within deliberations. Without clear links to how input informs deliberations, groups shared that they can't learn how to make better submissions or show their communities how their contributions inform reimbursement reviews. There's also a desire for ongoing engagement, not simply one-time submissions. And lastly, on flexibility, we heard that the template can be challenging and time-consuming, and for some groups, they lack resources to provide extensive input. There was a preference for options that accommodate varying capacities, preferences, which might include multiple formats and methods for input. Some of the ideas shared with us include streamlining submission processes and to consider a user-friendly online submission process. Other ideas included to provide clear guidance, so step-by-step instructions, video guides, checklists. Another idea was to explain the deliberation pathway more clearly in plain language and provide some case examples to help support that. We were also suggested to offer further details on how input was used and what it informed, and to provide methodological toolkits for interviews, surveys, and alternative formats for groups. On to drug systems. During our engagements, we heard that understanding the drug system can be confusing, and it's unclear at times which organization or jurisdiction is responsible for what. We heard that there's a general lack of resources to understand our role in the system, including reimbursement reviews. This is especially relevant to new groups seeking to contribute input, and that they need further guidance on how their input can help support deliberations at the stage of the drug reimbursement system that the CDA-AMC is in, and what is outside of CDA-AMC's purview. Some of the ideas shared with us were to offer some resources that explain our organization's role within the healthcare landscape and the drug approval and reimbursement pathway. Moving into equity and inclusivity. So we heard that including perspectives from systematically marginalized or equity deserving groups is challenging. There is limited capacity for outreach to hard-to-reach groups and translation to other languages. Some of the ideas shared with us include supporting outreach and collaboration to reach diverse communities, exploring mechanisms for individuals to contribute input directly to us, and lastly, to translate materials into multiple languages and potentially allow storytelling or verbal inputs. Moving into alignment with the deliberative framework, there was general agreement that input from patient groups should align with the deliberative framework to ensure that input can directly inform deliberations. Groups emphasize their ability to provide insights on all domains of the deliberative framework. However, there is a desire to be specific in our guidance on what is not required to avoid any unnecessary efforts. Some of the ideas shared with us include using targeted questions aligned with each domain to reduce time and effort and improve relevance of the questions being asked, providing mock examples, toolkits, or instructions, clarifying unique contributions of patient input versus clinical evidence, and considering a repository of past inputs where groups can reuse their previous inputs where appropriate. Moving into methods for collecting patient perspectives. So patient groups highly valued interviews, often combined with surveys. Interviews are seen as rich in detail, but can be time consuming and resource intensive. Groups want clarity on which methods we value most to be purposeful in their selection. And there is a desire for flexibility in methods to reach diverse voices and to enable groups to contribute in ways that work best for them. Some of the ideas shared with us include using a range of methods to collect input to accommodate capacity differences. So methods like surveys, interviews, focus groups, verbal approaches like video or audio, or social listening were all valued. We heard there's a value in accepting various formats, such as video submissions, especially for certain population with accessibility considerations. It was also suggested to explore mechanisms for individual patients with lived experience to contribute outside of formal patient groups. Moving into the template, the input template itself and submission format. So we heard there's a need for clearer expectations around the type of input needed and what is valued to inform deliberations. For example, story-based versus number-based input. We also heard there's a lack of clarity on what to do when groups cannot answer all of the input questions within the template based off what they've collected or what they know from patients. There was a general openness to new submission methods, but it was really emphasized to us that groups need assurance it'll be considered fully in deliberations. Some of the ideas shared with us include refreshing the template to include simplified and flexible formats or a combination of targeted and broad questions, enabling multi-format submissions, written, verbal, audio as well, and to also provide an online submission process like a web form to make the process a little easier. We heard during our consultations that guidance and support should be tailored to the needs of a group. For example, those submitting for the first time would need greater support and clarity in the process, while some of the more experienced groups may only need a short guidance resource. Accordingly, patient groups emphasize the importance of providing multiple resources and learning opportunities to allow groups to access information and guidance in a way that works best for them. We heard a lot of great ideas. There's many on the screen here, but just to give a few examples of video guides, guidance documents with step-by-step instructions, examples of strong inputs, frequently asked questions, one-page documents with infographics, checklists to support submissions, materials translated in multiple languages, among others. Among many ideas shared with us, we heard that any input received, no matter the format, should be considered meaningfully and appropriately at deliberations. As we look to the future, we're keeping this top of mind. We also heard that privacy considerations are essential and that processes need to be in place to protect the privacy of submitters, which can be challenging with certain formats suggested as ideas for us to consider, for example, video submissions. Thank you all for taking the time to share new ideas and how we can improve upon this process. I do want to say a quick reminder that you can submit Q&A questions at any point just by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. But I'm going to pass it over to Michelle now to highlight the next steps and the actions that we're taking to move forward.
Thanks, Sam. Before I share information about the specific actions we're taking, I want to once again acknowledge the incredible depth and thoughtfulness of the feedback we receive throughout the engagement process. I think that's pretty evident from what you just heard from Sam, the number of ideas and opportunities that were identified. So thank you again. Over the course of the consultations and various engagement activities, patient groups, caregivers, and individuals with lived experience shared not only their perspectives, but also their hopes for a more inclusive, clear, and supportive patient group input process. This feedback has been invaluable, as I noted before. It has helped us identify some concrete areas for improvement and evolving our approach. While we can't implement every idea, we are committed to continuous improvement and to continuing to revisit the feedback and ideas shared as we proceed. It is very much our intent that we're moving forward with a continuous improvement mindset and looking for opportunities for continuous improvement. And also want to note as I share, what we're planning as some immediate next steps that we will be looking for your feedback as you work with us. With some of the changes that we're implementing, we really want to understand how that's addressing the concerns and issues that were and opportunities that were identified, and if there's opportunities for further improvement as we proceed. So I'm excited to share where we're moving ahead with, and I'll try to touch on also how we think that what we're moving forward with now addresses the improvement objectives that I shared a few moments ago that we started with and validated through the engagement process. So reducing the effort and resource for patient groups, increasing the clarity on how input is used and considered, and aligning and focusing on what is most needed to support the review process, including expert committee deliberations. Let's walk through what's changing, what's being tested, and how we're planning to support you through these updates. So first, we will update the patient group input template to align with the domains of the deliberative framework. It is our intention that the updated template will decrease the effort required to collect and submit input and provide clarity for patient groups by being more direct about what information is and is not needed for the review process and expert committee deliberation. The updated template is intended to help enhance the consistency and transparency of the input process as well. Written submissions will remain an important foundation of input and will be maintained, as I'll highlight in a moment. And we, will continue to look at other mechanisms and methods for input and engagement. Know that this written input submission is an important foundation that we have an opportunity to improve. And these improvements and the enhancement of our written submission input process, it does align with the practices in other HTA agencies as well, where many of those also align their input questions with either their deliberative framework or value framework that is used to guide their assessments and deliberations. In a few moments, Deirdre will highlight some additional information about the input template and what you can expect from that. It's in the process of being developed, and so we'll turn back to Deirdre in a few moments after I share some of the other next steps. You heard Sam talk about what we heard about the kind of guidance that would be helpful, and multiple different types of resources being of potential value for folks. Thanks to the feedback, we have a good list of action items that we can focus on immediately in our efforts to support participation in the input process, while others may need more time to develop. We are updating the guidance for providing a patient input document, if that's a resource that you've been turning to for your input submission preparation. That will be updated alongside the introduction of a new updated input template. Over time, we'll develop other guidance and support tools based on suggestions provided. Some of these will be provided sooner than later, and there's a list of them there, including a glossary of terms and acronyms, short plain language guidance, submission checklists, frequently asked questions on reimbursement reviews, and common questions about input as well. Beyond this, Sam shared some other ideas that we've heard about what would be helpful, and we'll be moving forward with developing and adding additional resources over time as well. So next, on the support for providing input, we heard about the needs for opportunities to interact and engage and ask questions. So we're taking action to address that as well. Our engagement officers, Sam is one of those, but there are others on the team as well, will be available to answer your questions about providing input. We'll provide support on requests for groups with questions or wanting to learn about the input process, and we'll update the patient input instructions page on our website with more details on opportunities to engage and resources to help groups contribute. Keep an eye out in upcoming communications where we will flag how to get the support you need and how to find it. Next, on the point about the need for further education and information sharing, it is our plan to host educational webinars because we know that understanding the drug reimbursement review process can feel complex, and preparing for input can be challenging, especially for those that are new to the work. So we are looking at a potential series of educational webinars and learning sessions specifically designed for patients and patient groups. We will host on webinars on a variety of topics over time, anticipating that a focus on the drug reimbursement review process and how to gather and submit input will be priority first steps for us on that front. So we want to ensure that groups feel confident about what's expected and how their contributions make a difference. So we're hoping that this plan will help with that. I referenced this a couple of moments ago. In addition to what I've just shared, we do plan to test a new engagement approach focused on reducing the time and effort for patient groups. The approach we are testing is a Canada's Drug Agency hosted and facilitated group discussion aimed at gathering input from patient groups' perspectives. We will test this approach with involvement and support from patient groups. And the plan for initial testing is to begin with the Formulary Management Expert Committee for select reviews. And many of you online will likely have been familiar with the fact that we use reviews going to our Formulary Management Expert Committee as that committee being our innovation sandbox, where it's an opportunity for us to test some of these new ideas and understand what is needed and how best to approach those and consider if they're applicable for further expansion. So that's the process that we're going to use for this new facilitated discussion engagement approach. So you'll hear more about that in the future once we've learned more from tests. I also want to note that we heard about the importance of groups being able to understand how input has been used and informed the recommendation. And we have making changes to the recommendation report to highlight the domains of the deliberative framework that the input contributed towards. And we heard groups want more feedback, but also want their input reflected in recommendation reports more clearly. We hope that this step will help groups understand more clearly how their input was used and informed the expert committee deliberations. As with other changes that we are moving forward with, we are looking forward to your feedback on these recommendation report changes and how that has helped advance our intention, how and if it has helped advance our intention. All right. So just to recap, what's next? What can you expect in the shorter term from us? The new patient group input template will be one of the first pieces that you will see in terms of changes. It's currently being developed and will be launched soon. As I mentioned before, it's aligned with the deliberative framework, and Deirdre will provide you with some highlights in just a moment. We are working towards a January 2026 launch of the updated template, which will include some initial updates to resources available to support those participating and contributing to the input process. Webinars and learning opportunities. Keep an eye on our website and our communications newsletters for upcoming webinars and educational sessions, as we'll plan and advance the schedule of those in the relatively near future as well. We're developing additional resources to support both new and experienced groups, and some of those initial resources will be available alongside the patient group input launch, and others to follow shortly thereafter, with a view to continuing to add based on feedback and needs over time. And as I've already mentioned, we want to make sure that there's an understanding that we are here to help. And so being very clear about that. If you have questions or need support, our engagement officers are available. And that can be on an as requested basis, but we're also planning to add, some structure to opportunities by creating an office hours type of approach where we'll have engagement officers available for drop-in support. So again, stay tuned to our communications and the website for more information on how to access that as we implement that. Lastly, we want to continue to improve how the input process over time. And I've mentioned that a few times now. So, but just really want to emphasize that for folks. So before we wrap up this webinar and turn to questions, and we want to share some additional details about what the updated input template will focus on, as well as share some information and reminders about other Canada's Drug Agency initiatives that are likely of interest to you. Next, I'll pass it over to Deirdre, who's going to provide that brief overview of what to expect in the new patient group input template. Thanks, Deirdre.
Thank you, Michelle. So as you're aware, the current patient group input template is not directly aligned with the new deliberative framework. And after hearing from many of you during our external engagement process, we took a close look at how the template could better reflect what committees and review teams need. We spoke to our internal teams who rely on the patient group input, those who work on the clinical, economics, ethics, and other parts of the review, as well as with our committee members to understand what information is most useful for their assessments and their deliberations. We also considered advice and feedback from patient groups about how to improve the clarity and the language of the input questions. All of this feedback to help us to shape the updated template so it better supports how reimbursement reviews are done today. We've updated the template to hopefully make it clearer, easier to use, and more closely aligned with how our expert committees review drugs. The biggest change is that the template now follows the 5 domains of our deliberative framework. This helps to connect the experiences that patients and caregivers share to the areas where committees consider their recommendations, and it makes it easier for committees to use that input throughout their deliberations and in the recommendation report. The new template also includes more guidance and examples. And these are meant to make the questions easier to understand and to show what types of information are most useful. We've added a new section on equity and diversity that invites groups to reflect on whether certain communities may be affected differently by the condition or by the current treatments. And this supports our ongoing organizational commitment to considering equity in our work. For drugs that require biomarker testing, the template provides clearer questions about testing experiences, including access and potential challenges. To be clear, this section only applies when there is a new test associated with the drug under review. And finally, the updated template includes a key point summary where patient groups can highlight 3 to 5 messages. This helps to ensure the most important insights stand out in the review and for the committee. What hasn't changed is the purpose of the template. It remains a tool to make sure the voices of patients and caregivers are heard and reflected in our reimbursement reviews. The updates make it easier to share those experiences in a way that directly supports committee deliberations. Over to you, Sam.
Thanks, Deirdre. So we had mentioned earlier that we heard that the drug access system in Canada is challenging to understand or learn about. So we're really excited to highlight some of the incredible work our system coordination team has very recently launched on drug access in Canada, understanding the system. This is now available on our website for all. This resource was written by CDA-AMC for people and organizations working in the drug system. It's freely available both in English and French, and it includes a helpful infographic that describes the drug access pathways. Readers can choose to explore content at different levels of depth, so a quick overview, a focused summary, or a comprehensive deep dive. It describes key aspects of the drug system, including public drug plans, private drug plans, and hospitals. And this tool was validated by those responsible for these processes and will be updated regularly. We really hope that this will be useful to you all, and we are developing additional resources to tailor this information for different audiences. So check it out on our website. The link will be shared in our chat. You may have seen announcements about the 2026 symposium. So the symposium will take place from April 22nd to the 24th in 2026 as a 3-day hybrid event, with both in-person and virtual attendance options. So the in-person program will be held at the Rogers Centre in Ottawa. This year's theme is especially relevant to today's webinar. So focused on evidence and exploring how HTAs are evolving through new methodologies, data sources, and analytical tools. On engagement, centering collaboration and inclusivity, this program stream highlights the essential role of engagement in health technology assessment. And lastly, systems. So delving into the structures, policies, and system level changes needed to meet the pace of innovation. We are pleased to announce that applications are now open for the Symposium 2026 Attendance Support Program. So this program is designed to support individuals who would not be able to participate in the symposium without financial support. Eligible applicants can receive up to $3,000 to offset registration, travel, food, accommodations, and other symposium-related expenses. So to be eligible for the attendance support program, applicants must represent one of the following groups, so students, patients and caregivers, or members of equity-deserving groups. Feel free to visit the Symposium 2026 website. You can review the program criteria and complete the application form. The deadline is on Wednesday, December 17th to apply, and I believe that link will be in the chat as well. Before we jump into the Q&A, we do want to just share how you can stay informed for upcoming projects, events, and new resources available. You can use this QR code or go to cda-amc.ca subscribe to be notified. Sona is also going to add the link to this as well in the chat. And so this is where we'll be announcing any upcoming dates for this subsequent changes. So I want to give a quick thank you to Deirdre and Michelle for these overviews today. We do have some time for Q&A questions with participants. So again, feel free to enter your questions in the Q&A feature within Zoom, and I'll be moderating the question period. So in terms of maybe my first question, I think this one would go to Deirdre. There was a question just wondering if a scorecard is used within the deliberative framework, and if so, could you share the scorecard, or if not, how do you weigh each of the sections within the framework itself?
Thanks for the question and thanks for the opportunity to clarify. So our committees don't use a quantitative multi-criteria decision analysis. So there is no weighting. It's a qualitative process. With that being said, for our drug reimbursement reviews, we do use a recommendation framework. So there is a particular way in which the domains do interact with each other. So the committees foremost look at the clinical value, and they also consider the unmet clinical need and the distinct social and ethical considerations. And these are the domains that we might consider the appraisal criteria because they're really the ones that influence the decision of whether or not to reimburse a drug. If the decision is to reimburse, that is when they would consider the economic considerations or potential health impacts. But otherwise, just want to make clear that there is no weighting of the domains against each other, and that the committees do discuss and deliberate on all of the domains during their deliberations.
Thank you, Deirdre. We have a similar question, but maybe I'll throw this one to Michelle. In terms of the inputs received from patient groups, do evaluators have a rating scale or process for evaluating patient group input submissions, so kind of rating the level of evidence of these patient group input submissions?
Thanks, Sam. And the short answer to that is no, that the information that is gathered from patient input submissions is used as very important information, perspectives that contextualizes the available evidence. It is not critically appraised as evidence as part of the process, but is meaningfully and seriously considered through the deliberative process, and also very informative, as Deirdre described earlier, very informative to the appraisal of the evidence that is submitted if it's a sponsored review or that is, provided by CDAMC if it's a non-sponsored review. So, very similar answer to Deirdre's in there, in that it's a qualitative approach of the deliberation and how it's considered, but it is not evaluated or appraised. And everything that is submitted as part of patient group input is seriously considered.
Thanks, Michelle. Appreciate that clarity.
Okay.
And maybe I'll go back to you, Michelle, again. Does any of this apply to clinician input as well? Will there be a new template for clinicians, or is this just geared towards patients?
Yeah, great question. And we've obviously focused on patient, the patient group input process today, but as we have shared on our website and everything previously, we've had a similar engagement process with clinicians, clinician groups, and patient groups who are involved in coordinating and facilitating clinician group input for their pharmaceutical reimbursement reviews. And that occurred a few months after the patient group input process. So we're just a couple of steps behind in terms of, still actively considering what we're going to be moving forward with. Similarly, we heard, lots of great information, lots of great feedback that we're processing. And in the new year, we'll be sharing more information about where we're heading with the clinician group input process. But the changes that we've shared today are focused specifically on the patient group input process. So hope that helps.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm going to keep you in the hot seat here. So,
Okay.
do groups of patients providing inputs on drug reimbursement reviews need to be formally organized?
Great question. So the intent behind our current process being patient group input is to have input that reflects the perspectives of multiple patients or caregivers in a submission. And so, we don't require that a group be a formal organization, but rather have some connection to multiple patients to be able to provide that. The engagement officers are happy to address any questions that folks may have about, whether the group that you're connecting with or want to connect with for an input submission, would be considered a group, and any tips or advice around the input submission process. But we do hear from a range of groups, from very formal, nonprofit organizations to much less formal groups of individuals who are preparing submissions on a volunteer basis. So
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle. I think this question is more for Deirdre. Could you please clarify how the deliberative framework will be implemented in future submissions?
Sure, thanks for the question. So the new deliberative framework was piloted in our formulary management expert committee last year, and after a successful pilot, it was launched in CDEC and PERC as part of our previous updates to reimbursement reviews. So for reviews, I believe, that were submitted after April, the committees have now been using the new deliberative framework, and you will also see updates to our recommendation reports that align more with that deliberative framework. So this is a step to evolve the patient input to match that process. But to be clear, the new deliberative framework is currently in use in all of our expert committees.
Thank you, Deirdre. I guess my next question would be for Michelle. Will there be any financial support for patient groups to produce input? Since there appears to be appreciation for patient groups but some have a lack of financial and human resources capacity.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. And this is certainly something that we've heard about the potential need for over time, and including in our most recent engagement. Where we have started with our improvements now was to first of all respond, you know, our understanding of, the identified need for some to potentially have financial support to participate in this process is connected to the feedback that we've had about the level of the amount of time and effort required to participate in the process. And so where we've started with is seeing if we can, with the improvements that we're planning to introduce, and the alternate engagement approaches that we're testing, if we can reduce the amount of time and effort, so that it is not, a significant investment of resources that's required on the part of groups, but we're still able to have that really meaningful input and the perspectives that are so important to the process. So that's where we're starting. As with everything else, I said that we have all of the ideas and thoughts that were shared, and all of the feedback that's been previously shared with us is still very much an active view. But we're starting to see how we can, make changes to reduce the effort involved.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And I guess kind of a follow-up to that, is there an expectation that, groups would be providing data with their input, so including survey data, charts? I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so the short answer is no. And as you shared, Sam, when you were, describing the kinds of things that we heard from about groups about the methods they were using or like to use to, be able to share information, surveys and, focus groups or, group discussions, a variety of approaches that groups use. We have no expectations of that, certain methods be used. As I mentioned earlier, really what we're looking for is an input submission that reflects perspectives of more than an individual, that reflects the perspectives of a number of individuals for patient group input submissions. We're not critically appraising what's submitted. If groups have questions about, different ways or approaches they could use, again, we're happy to, have a conversation about that. And it is one of the areas that as we move forward with webinars and things that we, hope to be able to, support groups and provide more information about, but we have no specific requirements about how the information is collected or, a number that of individuals that need to have provided input or anything like that. That it's awareness of what that is helpful to understand as part of the input submission, but it does, having, a larger number of people who have contributed to the input that's being provided doesn't necessarily, doesn't mean that that's going to be considered differently by the committee as a result of that. So.
Thank you for that clarity, Michelle. I appreciate that. I guess this question might be going to Deirdre. In terms of alignment with INES, so INES is the HTA body for Quebec. I'm curious, were there considerations about aligning this input template with INES to kind of reduce the efforts required on patient groups?
Thanks for the question. As part of our update process, we did speak with other HTA bodies, international and nationally, and we did review their patient group input templates with a particular focus on ENES, recognizing that there's a potential there to ease the burden for patient groups. So you'll notice that key point section, for example, is drawn directly from the current ENES patient group input template. That being said, one of the main goals of our update process was to align our input submission template with the deliberative framework. And ENES and Canada's Drug Agency do use different deliberative frameworks, so it is challenging for us to align them completely. But we did take that into consideration as we were crafting the questions.
Thanks, Deirdre. Appreciate that clarity. And I guess my Question would be next for Michelle. Should groups still submit input even if they can only answer some questions of the input template based off what they collected or what they're aware of?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that you'll see in the updated guidance that will be available with the launch of the updated template is clarifying that, because we have certainly heard that that is a question that folks have, that if they don't have information about a particular question, how is that viewed, or do they need to find a way to have that information? Our the short answer is that we want to hear and receive the input that you are able to provide. Not having information about a particular question should not preclude you from considering providing an input submission. We want to, whatever information is able to be provided is useful and will be considered.
Thanks, Michelle. And I guess my second question to you would be, could you explain how long do patient groups have to submit input for a regular reimbursement review?
Yeah, the call for patient and clinician group input goes out when we have the notification that a review is moving forward. So it is just just around 35 days that folks typically have. We have heard from folks about that time frame being challenging. But again, we're hoping that with the efforts to, clarify the expectations of what is needed, undertake some efforts to reduce the time and effort that may be required, that may be helpful to folks. Again, happy to have conversations about, what's feasible to be done and what could happen. The current guidance already does speak to that, but you can expect the updated guidance to speak to what's a feasible approach that can be taken in a relatively short period of time, but still provide input that's actually incredibly useful to the review process and the expert committee deliberation.
Thanks, Michelle. Last question I have for you would be, many patients, especially rural and remote patients, do not have any sort of group or patients in order to have input on potential new drugs for their disease. If the disease is rare, it's even more difficult for rural and remote patients. And so they're kind of wondering, how can they go about providing input into this process if there's not, an active group in that
Yeah,
space?
yeah. Yeah, very good question. Thanks for the question. I'll say a couple of things on that. One, get in touch with us, please. If you have that interest, we would like to hear from you and see what we could do to support that opportunity, to see if there's an opportunity for us to connect you to a group that may be planning to make an input submission, so that your perspectives can be considered as part of that, just as an example of a potential approach. And we did hear about this through our engagement process, about situations where it might be, it would be very helpful for individuals to be able to provide input, that might be, individual perspectives might be what's possible. There's a number of considerations for us, as well as considerations for those who are submitting, privacy, etc. So it's not one of the things that we're moving forward with now, but it is very much on our, mind, as something that we did hear about, and we understand, like, particularly how this may help us hear from those who we don't often hear from, whether it be the rural and remote, as the question highlights, or other, equity deserving groups. It is something that we are looking at what that could look like in the future. Not ready to, announce something, or move forward with something immediately. But please know that we have heard that, and we will continue. But in the short term, please get in touch with us, and we will see what can be done to ensure that your perspective is facilitated through the process that we have currently.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle. We just have a few minutes left, so I think we'll move into our wrapping up. If we didn't get to any of your questions today, we got a number of them, and so I'd highly encourage you to reach out to us to our requests email that's on the screen here. So requests at cda-amc.ca if you'd like to ask us these questions, and we can get back to you as soon as we can. Um, Thank you all so much for taking the time to join us to learn more about patient group input and drug reimbursement reviews and the upcoming changes that we're making. We really appreciate the time, your time in joining us today, and we're so happy to see such wide interest in this work. We had about 250 participants today. Un gros merci à tous nos participants aujourd'hui. Nous apprécions le temps que vous avez pris pour nous joindre et nous sommes heureux de voir tellement d'intérêt dans ce travail. I would do want to say a quick thank you to Michelle and Deirdre for joining us today and answering all our questions. Again, this recording will be found on YouTube early next week, and we will be emailing a link to the YouTube video recording early next week with that email as well. There is a post-event survey that you can click on the check mark icon at the top of your screen, but we'll also send this out by email in our follow-up email. So I think with that, we can close this session, but I want to wish you all a great rest of the week and thank you again for joining us today.